I'm going to give you two pieces of advice. And you've probably heard both of them, probably in the same week, and maybe even from the same person. The first, shoot for the moon. Set your sights high. Don't limit yourself. The second one is, don't let the perfect be the enemy of good. Know when to be satisfied. Don't hold out forever. Now, if you're paying attention, these two pieces of advice directly contradict each other. You can't simultaneously shoot for the moon and settle before you get there. And yet both are offered as wisdom. Both feel intuitively correct in certain situations, and neither tells you when to apply which one. Now, mathematicians at Stanford, the University of Wyoming, and the University of Colorado have done something I find genuinely delightful. They've taken this ancient human dilemma, how ambitious should I be, and they've solved it with equations. Now, I know you said, I'm not going to go to something with lots of maths in it, but it's nearly not a lot of maths. The answer is not what most motivational speakers would tell you. It's way more nuanced, more contextual, and considerably more useful than either of those pieces of folk wisdom that I described earlier. And it connects to everything that the BrainWise Enterprise Framework says about brain's threat and reward systems. And it does so in a way I think will feel immediately recognizable to our BrainWise listeners. So how ambitious should you be? Let's find out.
Welcome to Neuroscience Digest. I'm Cole Bastian.
And I am Phil Dixon.
And today we're tackling a question everyone has wrestled with and almost no one has answered cleanly. How ambitious should you actually be? We'll walk through a 2025 paper that solves it mathematically. Look at why perfectionism turns out to be a worse error than being too easily satisfied, and get specific about what it means for entrepreneurs, leaders, job seekers, and anyone who's ever felt worse after scrolling LinkedIn. But before we get into it, if this show helps you think differently about how your brain works, please leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever it is that you get your podcasts, and like, comment, share, and subscribe on all of our social platforms. You can find us everywhere at My BrainWise Coach.
And I will say up front to our BrainWise listeners, this is one of the papers with real genuine lightness to it. I found it amusing when I first read it. The findings are rigorous, but somehow the conclusions are oddly reassuring. I think you'll come away with less pressure on yourself, not more.
Before we get to the conclusions, let's be clear about the model, because the methodology is the point here. This is not opinion or observation, it is proof. The research team, led by Landgren as a postdoctoral scholar at Stanford's Dorr School of Sustainability, built what is called a sequential search model. The basic structure is this. Imagine you are searching for the best available option in a series of choices that arrive one at a time. At each step, you can either accept what is in front of you or continue searching in the hope that something better comes along.
And this applies to you when you are looking at your job search. Crucially, continuing the search has a cost. Time, energy, resources, opportunity. And you don't know in advance how many options you'll encounter or what the best available option actually looks like.
It is a model that could represent almost any important real-world search: a job, a business strategy, a romantic partner, a political campaign, a policy decision. The structure is the same: sequential choices, incomplete information, a cost to continuing, and a satisfaction threshold you either set explicitly or implicitly.
And I think that's exactly right. And the questions the researchers asked was this: where should that threshold be set in order to maximize your outcomes on average? They didn't go ahead and speculate. They proved it mathematically.
So what was the answer?
And it's not intuitively obvious. The answer is strictly above average, but strictly finite. Not the best possible outcome, and not the average outcome. Something in between those two. specifically something meaningfully better than average, that acknowledges there's a point at which continuing to search costs more than it gains. The old folk wisdom, it turns out, was both right and incomplete. Yes, aim higher than average, but no, don't shoot for the moon. The moon is not the optimal destination. The optimal destination is somewhere between where you are and the moon.
So, Phil, that sounds pretty straightforward, but what makes it non-obvious?
Well, two things. The first is what we call the asymmetric finding. That means things are different on one side than on the other. This, I think, is the most practically important result in the whole paper. The model shows that setting your threshold too high is significantly more damaging than setting it too low by the same amount. The perfectionist, the person who holds out for the absolute best, who rejects excellent options because they're not perfect, performs substantially worse than the person who is mildly too easily satisfied.
But the costs are not symmetric. Being a perfectionist is not just unhelpful, it is materially more harmful to your outcomes than its mirror opposite. And the second non-obvious finding?
The optimal threshold is not fixed. It depends critically on the shape of the environment you're searching in. And this is where the paper becomes genuinely sophisticated.
This is the distribution question, and it's the part most people won't have encountered before. It changes the practical advice significantly depending on what you're doing. The researchers looked at how the statistical shape of the environment should change the threshold you set. The two cases they focus on are left-skewed and right-skewed environments.
Now, you know I'm a research nerd, so this is the part of the paper that I actually found intellectually lovely. And it's a counterintuitive twist that's worth taking a slow look at. A left-skewed distribution is one where the bad outcomes are more extreme than the good ones. Most results cluster around the average or above it, but when things go wrong, they go very wrong indeed. Economic policy making is the paper's example. Most years in a functioning economy are fine. Some are good. But recessions, when they occur, are larger in magnitude than the booms. The downside is bigger than the upside. That's a left-skewed distribution.
The right-skewed distribution is the opposite. Most outcomes are below the average, but occasionally something extraordinary happens that pulls the average up dramatically. Entrepreneurship is the paper's example here. Most startups fail or produce modest returns, but the existence of a small number of unicorns, the Googles, the Amazons, distorts the mathematical average so far upward that it bears no relationship to the typical outcome.
That's exactly right. Huge difference.
And the optimal ambition threshold is different in each case.
Radically different, and in ways that contradict the intuitive response. In a left-skewed environment where the bad outcomes are extreme, the researchers find that you should be more ambitious relative to the average, not less. You should raise your target above where the distribution's nastiness might otherwise pull your expectations. The logic is this: don't let the large recessions drag down your target for a typical year. The severe downside events are real, but they shouldn't define your ambition for the normal case.
In a right-skewed environment, entrepreneurship or wealth creation, you should actually be less ambitious relative to the average, because the average has been inflated by a tiny number of extraordinary outliers that tell you nothing useful about your own realistic range of outcomes. So the entrepreneur who is comparing themselves to Elon Musk is not just being unrealistic, they are mathematically setting themselves up to perform worse.
Yeah, and that's the way the mathematics come in. The paper's co-author, Matt Burgess, put it precisely. In entrepreneurship, you want to take risks, but you should also not be discouraged if you don't become the next billionaire. The billionaire is already built into the distribution, but the billionaire is so far into the tail of the distribution that they are statistically irrelevant to your decision-making as a benchmark. Setting your satisfaction threshold relative to the billionaire means you will routinely reject outcomes that are genuinely excellent by any reasonable measure, because they do not raise the floor of your artificially inflated expectation. As the asymmetry finding shows, that's an expensive error.
The left-skewed case is equally counterintuitive from the other direction. In economic policymaking, or any domain where the bad outcomes are more extreme than the good ones, the naive response is to lower your ambition to protect yourself from the downside. The paper says that this is wrong.
Yeah, the downside events are real, and you should manage for them. But they shouldn't reduce your target for what a good outcome looks like. Separate two things, the risk management from the ambition setting. You can be cautious about risk while remaining ambitious in your goals. In fact, left-skewed environments, you should be more ambitious than the average outcome would suggest. The math says, don't let the fear of recessions make you set your economic growth targets at recession level.
Or another way of saying it, don't let the fear of striking out keep you from playing the game.
That's exactly right.
The social comparison finding is the one that I think will land most powerfully with the general audience, because everyone who has ever spent time on Instagram or LinkedIn has experienced what the paper is describing. The paper finds, and this is mathematically demonstrated, not just observed, that upward social comparison is costly. When people judge their success exclusively against peers who are doing better than they are, their performance drops substantially in the model. They become chronically dissatisfied and miss achievable rewards.
Langendorf, one of the other co-authors, makes the connection to social media more explicit. Focusing only on our most successful peers distorts our view of what's achievable. And social media algorithmically amplifies this distortion because it's specifically designed to surface the most engaging contact, which tends to be exceptional, extraordinary, and by definition, unrepresentative of the typical experience.
What you're seeing on social media is the right tail of a distribution, and you're using it to calibrate your ambition threshold. The person whose LinkedIn feed is full of peer promotions, funding rounds, and exceptional achievements is in an algorithmically curated right-skewed environment. The average of what they're seeing is not the average of what's actually happening in their peer group. It's the average of the most noteworthy subset.
And if they set their satisfaction threshold to match that inflated average, the paper proves that they will perform worse than if they had set it relative to the actual distribution of outcomes. They will reject genuinely good opportunities because those opportunities don't match the floor of their comparison set. They will experience chronic dissatisfaction. And they will do so not because they're weak-willed or psychologically fragile, but because they are making a mathematically suboptimal calibration error.
This connects directly to everything our BrainWise framework says about the brain's threat and reward systems. Chronic dissatisfaction is, in fact, a threat state.
Directly, the brain that's perpetually measuring itself against the standard it cannot reach is a brain running the protection driver, the monitoring of status and relative standing, and is in sustained threat mode. And as we've covered in previous episodes, the brain under sustained threat has reduced prefrontal capacity, reduced access to the long-term reasoning that good decisions require, and increased sensitivity to immediate rewards as a compensatory mechanism. The social media comparison trap is not just emotionally uncomfortable, it's neurologically impairing the very cognitive architecture that good ambition calibration requires.
So let's make this specific, because there are at least 4 distinct groups listening who may need different versions of this practical message. The entrepreneur first. The message for the entrepreneur is, do not calibrate your satisfaction threshold to the unicorn. The unicorn is real. It's in the distribution. but it's so far in the tail that it's telling you nothing useful about your own likely range of outcomes.
Set your threshold above average. Aim for something genuinely good, not just the median startup experience, but set it relative to the realistic distribution of outcomes in your domain, not relative to the handful of names that have become famous. Take the risks that the entrepreneurship rewards, but don't let the Zuckerberg comparison make a genuinely successful business feel like a failure.
Let's talk about the corporate leader or policymaker.
The message here is the left-skewed one. Separate risk management from ambition setting. In domains where the downside events are more extreme than the upside events, macroeconomic policy, organizational change management, crisis navigation, the instinct to lower your ambition in response to the severity of possible bad outcomes is mathematically wrong. Manage the risk. Prepare for the downside by all means. But don't let the existence of severe downside outcomes lower your target for what good performance looks like. The recession is not the template for a growth target. The crisis is not the template for a normal year.
The person in a job search or career transition. Aim above average, but know where average actually is, which means knowing the actual distribution of outcomes for people in your situation, not the curated LinkedIn version of it. The paper validates what good career coaches have always said. The person who holds out for the perfect role passes up roles that would have been genuinely excellent. But it also validates the other half, the person who accepts the first adequate offer without considering whether something meaningfully better is achievable is also making a suboptimal choice. The mathematical sweet spot, above average but finite, is exactly what a good career coach is trying to help their client find.
And finally, the person navigating personal decisions, relationships, and life choices. The paper explicitly includes romantic partnerships in its model, and the validation data is both amusing and instructive. The researchers looked at online dating behavior and found that people naturally concentrate their messaging on partners who are slightly more desirable than themselves. Not the most desirable people on the platform, not people at their own level, but a calibrated notch above.
Which is, it turns out, mathematically optimal behavior. The people who message exclusively at the very top of the desirability distribution, shooting for the moon, get very low response rates, experience chronic rejection, and miss the highly compatible partners in the realistic range. People are, in at least this domain, already doing the math intuitively. The question is whether they can apply the same calibration to the other important searches in their life. So, Phil, the paper is titled Optimal Ambition in Business, Politics, and Life. What is the one-line takeaway you would like to leave with our BrainWise friends?
It's this: aim higher than average, but don't mistake the exceptional for the achievable. The mathematics proves what the best version of folk wisdom was always trying to say. The optimal threshold is in the middle, above average, but finite. Not mediocrity, not perfectionism, a specific, calibrated, context-sensitive middle ground that takes the actual shape of your environment seriously, rather than the curated highlight reel of your most successful peers.
Perfectionist is not failing because they lack willpower. They're making a mathematical error. The same mathematics that describes the error also points precisely to the correction. And the correction is not to lower your ambitions.
The correction is to calibrate them accurately. And there's a significant difference. Lower ambitions produce lower outcomes. Accurately calibrated ambitions produce the best available outcomes given the actual distribution of what's possible. It's a much more interesting and much more useful message than either shoot for the moon or don't be too ambitious. The mathematics says know the shape of your landscape. Set your target above its average. And stop comparing yourself to the people in the far right tail of a distribution that tells you nothing about your own realistic range. That's not settling. That's being smart.
Paper is Optimal Ambition in Business, Politics, and Life by Landgren, Langendorf, and Burgess, published in Physical Review. The link is in the show notes if you're interested. It's one of those rare academic papers that's genuinely readable and that will change how you think about decisions you're making right now.
The moon, it's a beautiful destination. It's just not where the optimal threshold is. It's not a council of moderation. It's a council of precision. And precision, as it turns out, sometimes gets you further than the moon.
So thank you for spending time with us today, BrainWise friends. And until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and always stay brainwise.